So hello there and welcome to another edition of the Charleston Leadership Interviews. My name is Meg White and I am a senior consultant at Delta Think and a director of the Charleston Conference. Today we are delighted to be talking with Nancy Kopans, who is Vice President and General Counsel and Secretary of ITHAKA, where she oversees the organization's legal, compliance, and governance needs. Nancy, welcome. Today we are so glad to be here with you and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Meg. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So we'll jump right in. I'd like to start, these interviews are really to get to know a little bit more about some of the speakers from the conference. So can you just start with maybe give us a little bit about your career and how you ended up at Ithaca?
Well, once upon a time, I thought I would be an English professor, and I was in English grad school, really enjoying it, and noticing that the job market wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And at the suggestion of a mentor, I had a part-time job. I applied to law school, thinking, well, I can write and I can think, and started off in a law firm, and then became interested in this thing called the internet. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And I happened to be in Boston at the time, and I took a lot of continuing legal ed classes in internet law, which wasn't a very big field at the time. And then the opportunity at JSTOR came up. And I thought, I don't want to go back to a big firm. At the time I'd had my first child. And this sounds so interesting. And I was always interested in education and thought, this sounds just great. So I applied and was fortunate enough to get the job. And that was about 25 years ago when things like Google or something new. So I've been able to have a really wonderful ride and front row seats to the development of this space.
And I was going to chime in and ask how many years ago was that? So I think you've really followed that arc, from the what is this internet to through some tumultuous and amazing changes over that period. So thanks for that. Always
Yeah. Well,
interested
fun
in,
fact, when I was
yeah.
in college, I took one of those multiple choice career assessment tests of like, what career should you go into? And it came back listing librarian, college professor, lawyer, and psychologist. And I think I've hit, I can check all of those boxes because certainly psychology is like oxygen when you're part of an organization. It's just everywhere. And I'm so happy having been in an environment where I thought I would end up in higher ed. I am now serving the higher ed community.
Well, and I also love that. That's fantastic. It's going to segue into my next question, but I love that librarian was part of that list. It's so interesting that you work so closely with libraries and higher ed as part of your job, and a lot of those psychographics clearly are sort of in your wheelhouse, shall we say. So staying with that theme, your role at Ithaca, you collaborate with many leaders in higher ed. Certainly the foundations of the organization are grounded in higher ed. What would you say currently, given the state of higher education, what are their chief priorities and concerns?
Well, there are a number of concerns, Meg. I think certainly resource allocation, libraries, like so many organizations and like so much of the higher ed space, are facing really considerable financial constraints. And yet at the same time, there are increasing demands and expectations. I mean, even from a compliance standpoint. So I think one of the biggest challenges for our sector is to continue to provide quality services and evolving services while also managing resources and constraints in that area.
Okay. And as you mentioned, that's a concern higher ed writ large, and that certainly impacts, uh, if you filter down for our audience, libraries and their ability to provide, as you said, those essential services for teaching and learning, research. So yeah, it's challenging times, changing times. So speaking of change, COVID game changer for many organizations in higher ed. One of the challenges, certainly in the recent past, and not only in higher ed, but ITHAKA included in that group. Can you talk a little bit about what lessons you learned at ITHAKA during COVID and coming out of COVID, and how have they maybe shaped the organization moving forward?
Sure, Meg. In fact, that was a really um, interesting time to be an online provider of scholarly resources. And we realized very quickly how needed our platform would be in this environment of remote teaching and learning. So one of the things we did quite quickly was to enable access to all JSTOR collections to any library institution licensing any collection, and to do that at no additional charge, so that libraries could really benefit from full access to a robust resource, and students and faculty could as well. And that ended up being a very interesting learning experience all around, because we could see usage spike, and libraries could see that. What does it mean if you could really have this broader access? We thought we would do this for about a year. We extended it for another year. We ended up doing it for, I think, about 2.5 years. I think that's correct. And realized afterwards that maybe we should rethink how we package our collections and what we make available to libraries. So we came up with the full access model so that institutions could license everything. And we already had evidence that everything is valuable for these institutions. And there's a cost to doing collection by collection, both for the libraries and for ITHAKA to manage it administratively. And if we could bundle these together, maybe it would just be a lot simpler. So we came up with a model, still making available collection by collection licensing if that's something that an institution wants. But the pandemic was a really interesting time to leverage our mission as a not-for-profit organization to make content available, to do it in a way that didn't add any costs to libraries and institutions and could only help them. And then to pivot to a different model that already it's encouraging what that level of interest is in the full access model.
And I remember I was lucky enough to, a few years ago, during that experiment, I was lucky enough to talk with Kevin Guthrie, who is the head of ITHAKA, on one of these leadership interviews. And you all were in the discovery process of saying, we're going to experiment with this. We're going to leave it on and we're going to see what exactly can happen here in the space. So it's fascinating to continue that conversation here with you today about sort of what the outcome was and how you've been able to pivot, as you say, to basically ensure. It's always a fine line, I think, between this demand-driven sorts of models, which financially can make sense in a time of tight resources. However, the unintended consequence of that can be that some serendipity may be lost in terms of the information-seeking behavior of some of the users. So I think it's fascinating. And, JSTOR, again, as you say, is a mission-driven organization, really taking a leadership role in experimenting with these models that there is evidence to say it drives usage, that expanded access actually drives usage of the content. So I think lots of people look to ITHAKA for leadership on that and are watching this experiment in progress as you move along. So thanks for that. It's fascinating. So we're a couple weeks removed from the Charleston conference in person, virtual still coming up next week here as we tape this interview, but you participated in the Long Arm of the Law session along with Roy Kaufman from Copyright Clearance Center. And you both discussed the impact of AI on licensing and copyright. For our audience, can you give us 3 takeaways that you'd like them to know or understand about your comments in that session?
There are no bad guys. There are a number of stakeholders. There are content providers, whether it's publishers, underlying rights holders like authors, there are libraries, there are end users. each constituent has important interests and important concerns. And when these are voiced, they're not necessarily unreasonable. They're coming from a place, and I think it's important to have a degree of trust and respect about what these interests and concerns are. So that would be the first, no bad guys. The second is, and related to it, the importance of talking to one another. A lot of people are very reasonable. Not everybody, but a lot of people are very reasonable. And to find common ground, to figure out, okay, how can we leverage benefits of AI and also be mindful of the need for some guardrails? Like, if you want anything goes, how do you get buy-in from content providers or certain content providers who have legitimate interests? Maybe they have obligations to underlying rights holders. And, if too restrictive on things, how do we allow our community, if we think about what's the end goal of providing so much of this scholarly material, how do we really leverage those benefits? So it's so important to be able to sit at the table, talk to one another, and try to find some common ground, approaching things with a degree of trust and good faith. And then the third, I would say, is thinking about where legal precedent offers guidance and where we're venturing into new territory. So, for example, in the area of AI, there's been a lot of conversation around the applicability of certain court decisions and other ways of thinking that come from the text and data mining space. And some of that might be applicable. These are important cases, Google Books, HathiTrust. But there are key differentiators in the AI space. The fact that AI is generative in terms of its output, and some other considerations. So being thoughtful about this, having a willingness to kind of dig deep and say, have we really decided this? Or are there some new things introduced? The fact that there appears to be a market for data sets now in the AI space, that too might be a differentiator from where we were when we were thinking about whether TDM is a fair use. So I would say the three areas are no bad guys, the importance of talking with one another, and the importance of being thoughtful about whether we have precedent and where we might be venturing into some new territory.
Thanks for that, and all great takeaways, I think, for any one of the Charleston Hub stakeholders who are listening in, whether you're publisher, librarian, or vendor. I think what struck me coming out of your talk was, you're an aggregator, and my background includes aggregation as well. So you kind of touched on this in your takeaways, but balancing the needs of all of those stakeholders. And there are really no bad guys. How do you ensure that users get what they need while maintaining the rights of the copyright holders? And that's writing in my notes, and was lucky enough to attend your session. That was one of my big takeaways, and you certainly did call that in those comments.
Thank you, Meg. I would also, I would add that wherever we go in this direction, we want to enable an environment that can facilitate the creation of new content. We need new scholarship. We need, whether it's creative work or scholarly work, which also can be creative, of course. It's important that we enable and support content creators in that environment so that scholars can continue to benefit from new ideas and new work, and it's not all coming out of effectively regenerated, reworked, pre-existing content.
Right. Keep maintaining that focus on real innovation and scholarship. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, speaking of Charleston, you were a first-time attendee. You and I got to spend some time together down there. Talk about the conference and your experience, some of your impressions.
Well, you see by my big smile, I'm thinking, wow, Wow. So it was my first time attending, not out of lack of interest, but I always felt like we historically have sent a lot of people from Ithaca to Charleston, and I had sensed, it's a lot of our library people, outreach people, content people, and I'm respectful of our bottom line and costs. And does the lawyer need to be there? And like, well, Meg, I was thrilled to be there, not only as a speaker, but everybody's there. And I met so many people that either I or my team have negotiated with on license agreements, and an opportunity to see people in person, to attend their sessions, to have them hear me speak. It's so helpful in generating trust and enabling us to even work together in the future. And I love the sessions as well. I learned so much about what is happening in our space and what libraries, publishers, universities, everybody's thinking about, and things we're thinking about, names that I had recognized from various resources that I read and encounter, and it just was such a rich and rewarding experience. And I had also never been to Charleston itself, so that in
Oh, wow.
itself, like, wow, so much to explore. But I felt like the return on going, it was tremendous, and I'm going to try to advocate to be able to go again.
Yeah. Though, thank you for that, and I will give credit to Leah Hines and her team. They really do such a fantastic job, and even the programming group, Beth Barnhart. Love to hear that your overall experience is great, especially the interpersonal communication and the meeting of the people. And you talked about having a seat at the table, but also there's a lot of time and effort that goes into curating the agenda. So it's good to hear that
I can't even
that was a big
imagine.
part.
I mean, there were so many, it was difficult to choose among various simultaneous sessions. I'm glad, there are recordings, so that's available. I also could see how people engage in the conference in different ways. I know for some of my colleagues, it was nonstop meetings, very productive. Everybody's there. Were they able to attend as many sessions as they might have wanted? No, but those will be available online. And so the different ways that people can participate, it was really fantastic. I felt like I was at kind of like, almost like a university experience of so much interpersonal, so much information. It was really fantastic. So really kudos to the whole team. I don't know how you pull it off. There were so many things going on over multiple days. I'm sure your work starts, the minute after the
I mean,
current session
I
ends.
cannot take much credit on that front, but certainly we'll give a shout out to the folks that do the heavy lifting there, Leah and Beth and that whole group. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, and we hope you'll come back as an attendee and potentially as a speaker. So this is awesome, and thank you so much for sharing all of this information and background. I'm going to switch the attention back to you personally. What do you like to do when you're not lawyering for Ithaca? What are some of your hobbies or things that you enjoy doing outside of work?
Um, I really like extracurricular activities. So, I would say, first, friends and family. That's always sort of delightful, and most of the time, no, it is always
All
delightful.
right, we're coming off the
Uh,
Thanksgiving holiday,
there's no
so
secret story or
right.
anything. I just thought, um, um, and I love arts and culture. I live in New York City, and so that's around every a couple times a year. I take a drawing class, even not because I am a fabulous drawer, but it helps me pay attention and see the
Mhm.
world in a remarkably wonderful way. I mean, I realize, wow, you could spend endless time drawing a shell or an apple, just a way of seeing it. Because I find my mind tends to sort of race along so often, and I need to slow it down sometimes. I also love outdoor adventure. I do a lot of hiking, including winter. I'm a winter ADK, Adirondack person. I've done some high altitude mountaineering, open water swimming, including some cold water swimming. I've been off to the beach recently, and it's not trying to break records or prove anything. It's just been a lifelong thing that I really love, both in a solitary way and also in a communal way. So
I-
that is a very nourishing thing for me.
Um, I was with you until you said cold water swimming. I have to admit that takes it all to another level as far as I'm concerned. So kudos to you for
I
taking
think I
that
just succumbed
on.
to peer pressure. I fell in with a crowd, and like, what can I say?
Tip of the hat. That
If
is
I didn't
not
like them so much, I might have a different view of them.
well.
But if I want to hang out with them, I think I need
Well,
to do this.
I would have to question that influence, but you keep doing you. It's all good.
Well, I reserve the right to decide I don't want to do it anymore, too. So,
Well, yeah. Ooh, chilly. So we're coming near the end of our time, but is there anything else that you'd like to share with the Charleston community, either from a personal perspective or from your perspective at Ithaca? Maybe some future hopes. The floor is yours for any final comments that you'd like to share with our listeners.
I think that an event like Charleston is it's so important, and it's so important in even going back to kind of some of the takeaways I hope people will receive from my talk, in terms of developing appreciation and respect for where different constituents are coming from enabling everybody to talk to each other. When you encounter each other and see each other, it's just a lot easier to have a conversation, including difficult conversations. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree. There could be significant disagreements, but when you can say, I see that person every year, or I think I can talk to them. It's so valuable. So and also to allow for educating one another on what's emerging, what's coming down the pike. Again, to that kind of third, to the question you asked, Meg, about issues facing libraries. There's so many issues, and how do we deploy resources? What is the next big thing? What are the concerns? So having a forum for having these conversations through panels or one-on-one is really valuable, and I hope that even at times of different types of financial constraints that people are still able to attend, that the conference can continue, because I think the return on it is so impactful.
Well, and I love that even as a first timer, so one of the hallmarks of Charleston, and this goes back to when Katina founded the conference, is intentionally we try not to steer away from the hard conversations. We try to provide an environment in which everyone's voice can be heard and respected. And I'm so gratified to hear you talk about that as part of your experience as a first timer, because that really is one of the priorities and goals, and has been, since this conference was founded in the 80s. So thanks for that, and we certainly are grateful that you took the time today and for speaking at the conference. We hope you'll be back in the future.
We get to talk about a book.
Oh, do you want to talk about? Yes, let's go. What was that was also on the questions. We definitely have time. What was the last?
Okay, great.
Here we go. What was the last book you read, and that it was not related to your work? Please.
Okay. So there's the last book I read. There's a book I'm reading now. Of all things, the last book I read, not related to my work, was The Great Gatsby.
Now, you could not have graduated from Dartmouth College and not have read The Great Gatsby. It's
I've
not
read
possible.
it many times.
Okay.
I read it in, was it middle school or high school? I read it in grad school, but I haven't read it for a few decades. And of course it gets buzz. There have been movies. There's a show Gats. And I was thinking to myself, we're in another Gilded Age. And it's been a long time since I read that book. And, well, I have to say, I don't know if people know this, but it's a really good book.
And
And at this stage in my life, I read it with such a different perspective, and I read it. I was actually overseas for a little while I was finishing it up, and really had the sense like this is really an American work.
Hmm.
And the character, when I read it when I was younger, I sort of took it for granted. You know, Jay Gatsby has a big house, he has big parties. Okay, that's the way life is. But that idea of that sort of bigness of coming from, you know, the hinterlands, from Minnesota, and, you know, mysterious background and all, it I could see it in a different context now. And I could see that just the different characters like so I was it was I just was very surprised by my takeaways from it. It was really interesting. So that's a wonderful thing about literature is we change over time, and we can go back to a work and read it, and it's as if we're reading it kind of for the first time. Um, and right now I'm reading The Makioka Sisters by Tanizaki, a work of
Oh,
Japanese fiction,
I
in
just,
anticipation, not in Japanese, I'm reading it in translation, in anticipation for some travel soon to Japan where I've never been. And it is absolutely rich and wonderful, and I am learning so much. It takes place in the late 30s, early 1940s, and, you know, four sisters, and literature can really bring a sense of experience in such tremendous ways. So I never, I am getting a sense of Tokyo in that era and Osaka and other places. And I'm amazed by the power of fiction to connect us with experience and place.
and I an English major as an undergrad as well, so I echo those comments. That book just hit my radar screen. One of the end of the year lists, best lists, I think it was on. It just hit my radar
Oh,
screen.
really?
Yeah, and I don't know remember which one because there's so many coming out now. But yes, when you said it, I'm like, oh, I've seen that description, so I'll have to double down on that one and put it on reserve at the library. But um, I love what you said about Gatsby, um, just because that's art. You know, we our perspective determines how we interpret that art, and you know, coming back to that novel at this moment in time, at this moment in your life, your perspective completely changed how you interpreted that art. And I'll close by saying AI can never do that. So,
That experience is, and summaries can't do that. Cliff Notes can't do that. AI summaries can't do that. The experience of immersing yourself in that creative work. You know, I could say, you know, I think I need to take several days off from work so I can just like read the novel.
but I
So,
mean,
because
you just close your eyes and you imagine yourself, and you know, JSTOR within the last 5 years, 3 years, I can't remember off the top of my head, but also Art Store now. Just that experience of standing and looking at a painting and immersing yourself in that, and you described it as reading. It's magic. It's magic.
yeah, yeah, and you know, I like many these days, I'm a little challenged, and I'm drawn to reading things that probably don't use my brain in the same way, but it's all interesting and relevant. It's news, it's magazines. There are great things to be reading, informative, but I I I really try to make an effort to stay engaged in reading fiction or nonfiction too, but longer reads that have that immersive experience. And
Yeah. Well,
it's
I think those comments will be resonant with most of our. It's safe to say, probably the high
you
majority
think,
of our listeners are readers. So we're on safe ground there. You've got a we've got a both of us have a lot of company in that neighborhood. I
yeah,
think we
well, hello,
can.
audience.
Exactly.
Nice to be part of this.
Anyway, Nancy Kopans, thank you so much, and I'm glad that you snuck in that book comment at the end. And we certainly appreciate your time, and we'll see you again next year in Charleston.
I hope so. I hope so. Thank you so much, Meg, and
You're
thank you,
welcome.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.